Okay, good morning, everybody. Good morning. My name's Chris Scott. I work for Outdoor Recreation Northern Ireland, and we deliver the VSG Secretariat services, supporting Ken Dodd as chair, the board, and obviously you, the members. It's great to see 142 people registered for this webinar from all across the UK and Ireland. We normally get about 65 to 70% of folk who join us live at the moment. Others take the opportunity to watch this again afterwards. So that, yeah, just to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and the team will be sending out an e-zine tomorrow with the recording and all the slides and all the Q&A transcript as well. So you can sit back and relax and enjoy the webinar without furiously having to take notes as you go along. You'll be able to catch up on all that tomorrow. It'll allow you take in what the presenters are talking about. So the last webinar we delivered actually was back in June. Seems in one sense like a lifetime ago now on the journey we've all been on across this summer. That webinar, of course, was around the COVID-19 recovery guidance that VSG had produced at that time, which talked about approaches to reopening sites. The team will be sharing that, a link to that. You can download that, of course, for free. The team will be sharing a link to that in the message panel shortly. Although viewing the number of downloads we've had for that over the last number of months, I think most people who needed it have got a copy. To say the least, we've all had a busy summer. It's been, unprecedented really within the outdoor sector. So we're returning today with a webinar to really take stock and consider who is this new visitor that is visiting the outdoors. Further down the line, we'll be looking at more webinars across the autumn and winter and into the spring. I think it's inevitable. We'll be communicating with you in this format for a while. And we're also looking to relaunch a brand new VSG website in the coming month as well. A lot of work going on behind the scenes on that. And content being developed at the moment. So that'll hopefully be another fantastic resource for VSG members. My role today is MC, just to keep the thing moving and keep the thing flowing. And I can see people are quickly getting themselves logged on. All the delegates are coming online at the moment. So just going to give people a little bit of time to do that. And as I say, today's webinar is the new visitor. So who is this new visitor to the outdoors, and how do we reach them? And it's obviously been a really hot topic in the sector over the spring and over the summer. We've all probably collectively experienced a unprecedented growth of visitors to our open spaces and to our sites across that period. And that's been demonstrated really well, actually, in terms of some national research. For example, ORN, which we also provide secretariat services to, had a webinar a number of weeks ago, which looked at some of the research from Scotland, England, the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, which showed, the trends and growth of use of the outdoors during the lockdown period. So again, the team will send a link to that in the message panel as well, so you'll be able to view that. Not now. Stay online for this one. You'll be able to look at that in your time, because that shows some really good national perspectives. This event, of course, this webinar is to focus more on local perspectives, and that's why we brought in people from different areas of the VSG membership. So to look at those local perspectives and their individual learnings. So the ORN one looked at the national perspectives. As well as the population surveys that demonstrated, obviously we've seen a lot of media reports. Snowdon, the Lake District, Loch Lomond, the Trossachs, Dartmoor, Wicklow Mountains, etc., have all been in the press and been in the news. And again, that's fueled a lot of discussion between various VSG members. Hence this webinar. It's clear, it's a depressing thought, but it's clear that COVID-19 is not going away anytime soon. So we're all having to learn how to live and operate as organisations with this new environment. So therefore, and it's also clear that we're potentially going to experience new versions of lockdown or restrictions. I mean, even delegates from the Republic of Ireland will be very aware that you've moved to a new level of restrictions only last night. as a brief summary, people are now really restricted in travel to their own county in the Republic of Ireland, for example. But there's been good news as well. You know, growth is good. More people visiting our outdoors and bringing new people into the outdoors is what we've all been trying to do for many years. So there is great opportunities for us, but obviously the challenge is trying to manage some of the new behaviours that we've seen in the outdoors as well, and that's what we're going to cover during this webinar. We've obviously brought new visitors with new or different motivations, a new or different level of knowledge, and also different channels to communicate with them as well. So there's been a lot of broad challenges for us, all with trying to move with managing our own organisations and the internals with all that. So it's been a really challenging period, and it's been really impressive actually to watch the sector deal with it over the past number of months. So I'm just going to move on to the agenda there, Alan, please. You just flick up my next slide there, Alan. There we go. So first up today, we have some representatives from Dartmoor National Park, Orlando Rutter, who's the head of outreach and understanding, and he's working with Andrew Watson, who's head of access, recreation and estates. So they're going to talk about some perspectives from Dartmoor National Park. We're then joined by Jenny Wilson and Joe Mason, technical recreation advisors from Forestry England, and are going to give us an overview of the learnings and actions that have been undertaken within Forestry England estate. Noel Doyle then is joining us from Leave No Trace Ireland. Noel's a researcher with Leave No Trace Ireland, and he's going to talk about some perspectives from the island of Ireland as well, which is great. Nick Ayers then from the RNLI is the regional lead, a regional water safety lead for North and East of England. So we'll bring a different perspective there, obviously, for water recreation. We then asked Anthony Rawlins, who's the CEO of the Digital Visitor, to join us. So Digital Visitor is a strategic digital marketing agency in the tourism, travel and hospitality sector. So again, I've enjoyed listening to or reading Anthony's and his team's various blogs over the lockdown period. I think they've offered a very different perspective, an interesting perspective on things, and hence he's along here today to tell us all about that. And then of course we'll move into our breakout rooms afterwards. So if you just bring up the Q&A panel there, Alan, please. So I'd encourage you as we go through the presentations. We're about to start with the first presentation now. Great to see so many coming online there. So we've enough online now. I can stop talking and we can move on to the presenters. But I would encourage you. You'll see the Q&A panel in the top of your screen there, and that gives you an opportunity to ask questions during the session. The presenters that are online, whilst they're not presenting, will be able to answer some of those questions directly back to you. But of course, we appreciate there's a lot of expertise amongst the delegates as well. So if you think you can answer one of the questions or offer an insight to one of the questions, please join in the conversation. As we move to the breakout rooms, the various chairs of the breakout rooms then will be sort of keeping a note of the conversation around each of the topics, and the breakout rooms will give us an opportunity to discuss those in more detail. So it's really important you take the time just to answer or ask a few questions, and hopefully help answer a few questions or offer some perspectives as we move forward. Okay, so we're going to queue up the first slide here now, please, Alan. You can just skip past the next one and we'll move on to Orlando's first slide, please. Great, and I'll just double check Orlando is with us okay?
Yep, all good, and I've unmuted my microphone, so just checking you can all hear me.
We can hear you loud and clear, Orlando. So your first slide's up there. I'm just going to pass straight over to you, and then you're going to pass over to Andrew, and I'll come back in at the end. So over to you, Orlando.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that introduction, Chris, and thank you to all of you who've supported this. Really good. So we wanted to do a little bit of a two-hander, me and Andy, just to give some perspectives to answer the 4 questions about understanding our new visitor, reaching and engaging with them, and perhaps looking at some of their challenging behaviours and what we've done. So if I could have my first slide, please. this is just, I want to talk a bit about surveys and our approach to surveying. So I'm just waiting. There is a little bit of a lag there, but I was warned about that. So here we go. We did some face-to-face surveys and we targeted our hotspots, our honeypots, the problem areas. We managed to complete 260 surveys just over weekends and some of those busier, hotter times. And I want to take you through, and this is a real provocation for the breakout rooms, because I think what I want to highlight is the limitations perhaps of some of these surveys. So they throw up some interesting data, but they also throw up, I think, more questions than they answer. So if I have my next slide, please, which we start to look at some of the findings. So we saw that quite a lot of people were on holiday as a percentage out of the total. A lot of people were returnees, so a significant proportion were coming back, but quite a lot of people were new. The influence of COVID was really significant, so it looks like we could have had quite a lot of holiday makers who knew Dartmoor, maybe were furloughed, but that's a huge amount of assumption, and I think that that's one of the dangers that we make with surveys. We start to triangulate data that we don't really have. So if we go on to my next slide, where we start to explore that in a little bit more depth. So this is age of visitor, and here it becomes quite interesting because that curve, although it's a lovely bell-shaped curve in some respects, is we would normally expect that to be much more skewed. So our usual visitors to Dartmoor are in the 55 to 64. So the people who were answering the surveys were younger. And I deliberately used that language because that doesn't mean that all the visitors were necessarily younger, just those people who were prepared to answer surveys. So let's go on again and see who they were. And this again is perhaps no surprise. We got predominantly white populations. If we start at the back, so the black, Caribbean, African, other, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, that little slice looks very small, but is actually larger than the proportion of those communities that you would see in Devon. So were some of those out of county visitors not new, those people who we wouldn't normally have seen from those communities? The white other was quite interesting as well. We had Scandinavians, we had people from Canada, from America, from New Zealand, all countries with their own lockdown problems. And you know, what were they doing in this country and why were they scampering around our countryside? So there's some quite interesting stuff that's going on there. And once again, I think these very simplistic surveys can throw up data that you then start asking a whole load more questions now. So what were they doing? Let's have the next slide and see what they were actually said they would do coming to Dartmoor for. And this is really small, tiny writing, I apologise, but there you go. The big bars on the left of your screen, walking with the dog. So they were coming here to walk. Interestingly, right on the right hand side of the screen, they were also doing book writing. So what do surveys not tell us? If I could have my next slide, I'll perhaps illustrate it. This, we think, is a local resident who visits this car park regularly. This visitor spent 45 minutes with us reading those pamphlets really carefully and dribbling on the tablecloth. The visitor declined to fill in a survey, but we can make a lot of assumptions about this particular visitor. And I think that it just illustrates that sometimes we rely on data and we don't rely on actually our common sense and our gut instinct. So we need to be a little bit careful, because as soon as you produce something in a table, a chart, a graph, people think it's the truth, but I'm not so sure. If we go on to the next slide, we can also unpick some of that data and critique that as well. So not is all quite as it seems. So the people we interviewed said they came here to walk the dog. They were lovely people. Where we've had our problems is in the red circled area. People are coming for picnics and barbecues, camping and access to water. And Andy's going to pick that up, our response, in a minute. We got really low response rates from the people who were prepared to answer our survey questions. What you have to do is cast your mind into the role of somebody who wants to have a wild camping experience with a barbecue by some water, and they know that they're probably going to get told off. So if somebody approaches them in a national park uniform and a clipboard, they'll probably decline to answer that survey. So I think there are big problems with face-to-face, which is why we also have done quite a lot of work. Next slide, please, on what people are prepared to tell us for themselves without even being asked. So if we can move on to the next slide. This is actually, sorry, I anticipated. This is what they did tell us. So this is I asked people to give me 3 words about their visit to Dartmoor, and created this word cloud or Wordle from it. And you can see that amazing, stunning, beautiful, scenic and peaceful, good, really feature heavily. So that was a word that came up again and again across the surveys. Interestingly, wet and hot also appear, and those reflect the weather that we were having at the particular times. So I find those qualitative measures just as useful as perhaps sometimes the quantitative. So the next slide should take us on to what people will tell us for themselves without us doing any surveys. And there is this slight delay. So virtual visitors, we had these huge rises in Facebook, Twitter and Instagram followers. You can read the stats for yourself. And interestingly, they weren't just followers, they were engagements. So these were people who were having a conversation with us on social media. And that reach of over nearly 8 million is extraordinary, with, you know, that proportionate and significant rise. And what people will tell us for themselves, if I have my next slide, is where they like to go. And some of these were places that we didn't think they'd be particularly interested in. And so Foggin Tor Quarry is a place that is pretty, it's a post-industrial landscape, it's a Victorian quarry, it's really attractive in one way, and it attracts a lot of people because of the water. So we had 1,671 posts using a specific hashtag, but there were many more with location tags. And this is people self-declaring. And I think this is much more interesting than perhaps face-to-face surveys. This is where you find out what people are doing and what they are liking. And it also maps onto our types of visitors. So if I have my final slide, please. We can see, perhaps get an indication of where it fits with some of our survey data, where we were finding younger audiences. So here we go, a gentleman's day out, apparently, with, interestingly, I noticed some swimmers in the background who may or may not be wearing very much at all, but it's small enough that I don't think it'll offend anybody. And on to the conclusion. So for me, I think the provoke is, and this is what I like to explore in our breakout room, is, you know, the value of surveys, understanding visitors, using digital media, thinking about what motivates, what drives people towards us. And for me, quite a lot of this sort of imagery is what people come to Dartmoor for, especially in after lockdown and COVID. This was really important. So now I'd like to hand on to Andy, and he can talk about some of the problems some of that created and some of the solutions we found. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me. Chris, can you hear me? Thumbs up from Orlando. Yeah, good. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to share with you some of our experiences this summer, particularly in relation to COVID and the increase in visitors that we've all seen in relation to our camping. So if I can have the next slide, please. Yeah, move on to the next one. Should be any second now. There we go. So here is a map of Dartmoor National Park. We're down in the southwest of England, in Devon, and on the map there you can see a yellow boundary line, which is the boundary of the national park, and we've got the A30 running across the top of the map to the north, and to the south is the A38, and you can just see Plymouth in the bottom left-hand corner of that map. The areas shaded purple are the areas within of common land within the national park where you can wild camp, and we're going to look at in particular the area that's shaded red, that small area in the middle of the map. If you keep that in mind, we're going to look at that in more detail in a moment. So if I can have the next slide, please. So Dartmoor is one of the few places where in England certainly where you can camp legally for a couple of nights without needing landowners' permission, and we, because of some of the interest in wild camping and backpack camping, we're preferring to call it backpack camping because we think that gives a better description of what we actually mean by that, which is, and our key messaging is around travelling light, staying out of sight and treading lightly. So we're talking about carrying lightweight equipment as part of a longer walk or expedition, staying overnight for a night or two on the moor, leaving no trace, and so on. However, certainly in the last 10 years, and definitely this year, the ethos of wild camping is being lost, we're finding. And we're seeing larger tents being used, people camping in large groups together, certainly an increase in motorhomes and camper vans, pulling up at the roadside overnight and in our car parks, and say motorhomes owners, claiming that they're wild camping, staying in their motorhome, which is an interesting perception on that, isn't it? So if I could have the next slide, please. So we're now going to look at Belvoir, which is that small area on the map at the beginning of the presentation. Just waiting for it to appear. I can't see that yet. Here we go. So this is Belvoir. It's right in the centre of the national park. It's a flat, attractive, level site, and it's an area where you can wild camp. It's common land, and there is a car park and toilets which are operated by the Forestry Commission not too far away. So it's quite an attractive site, and as you can see the numbers of tents that we're seeing there. It's increasingly being misused, this site in particular, and this year is the worst that we've ever seen it. I think in part because we've had people staying at home for a UK-based holiday because of the problems of travelling abroad, trying to take a foreign holiday this year, and to a certain extent people coming down to the southwest England not having booked camping anywhere, and then finding that sites are full because they've been operating at 50% capacity, and so on, and then obviously not wanting to turn around and go home but finding somewhere else to come and camp as well. So at its peak, we've had, when we've visited sites, we've found in excess of 50 tents in that area, 18 campfires all blazing away. We've picked up hundreds of bags of rubbish and so on, including bottles, disposable barbecues. We've had fairy lights, garden furniture, you name it. We've had it all. We've seen it all this year, and some of the impacts of that are not just about litter, but in terms of public health. For those people going to the toilet outside, a lot of them going to the toilet outside. I'll leave that to your imagination on what that looks like. But we've also had disturbance to wildlife and to grazing livestock. Noise disturbance to the local community with loud music and so on, and a bit of a party kind of festival sort of atmosphere, if you like, going on in that location. So if we could have the next slide, please. So we've had a number of impacts that we've been dealing with this increase in visitors and behaving in this kind of way. Just waiting for the next slide to load up. So we've used, it's common land, it's under part of the legislation covered by the Dartmoor Commons Act 1985, And there's a section within the legislation which enables us to put in a restriction on access. We've never done this before. First time we've used it. We didn't quite know what to expect, but what we did for this area, you can see on the sign there, this is an image of the signage that was out on site with a map with a red board around it. And within that area, camping was suspended or restricted from the 7th of August through to the 2nd of September. As well as that, we increased our range of patrols in the area, and we also took an idea that the Police and Crime Commissioner had used for COVID marshals on the coast, which has been really busy, and we employed 4 marshals to provide support to the ranger team and extend our presence into the evenings and at weekends as well. So there were 4 marshals employed, 2 were on site at any one time, and then 2 were roving and patrolling the wider area to pick up displaced camping as people moved on. We also did a lot of work around communications and social media as well. And if we can move on to the next slide, and at the end of September, when the restriction ended, we asked people not to camp there by request for the rest of this year to allow the site to recover. So what have we learned, and what were the impacts with that? So we had a lot of support. It was really been an opportunity for us to reset the debate around wild camping and what that means. There was support as well from the wild camping community, who were worried, if you like, that this could be the end of the wedge and wild camping could be lost on Dartmoor. So that's been really good. Lots of engagement with visitors, including new visitors, explaining why we've put it in, put this restriction in place, and why we've taken the approach that we have. And generally, people have been very supportive of it. It's given us a chance, whilst it's been quiet, to undertake repairs to damaged areas, to erosion, to a lot of the fire pits, because a lot of the campfires are just on open ground. We saw a return in family groups and different sort of visitors back there for quiet recreation, which was encouraging to see, and it gave us an opportunity to engage with the new visitors to the national park. The marshals were very effective, but it was very resource hungry. You can see there it's £20,000 we spent on additional staff costs and so on. And the rangers' work was also reprioritised and diverted to deal with this, and took them away from other areas of work as well. And it was a very valuable partnership between ourselves, particularly in the Forestry Commission, and the Dutch Ayers as landowner and so on. And would we consider using it again? Well, I think we would. It's been successful, and I think if we had to use it, then we would do again. So that's it from me, Chris. That's it from Dartmoor. Back to you, Chris. Thank you.
Orlando and Andrew, thank you both very much. Really interesting stuff there, and great to see some, those practical measures, Andrew, really take an impact, and something you can, it's great to share those learnings with others who have, I'm sure, experienced the same thing. Orlando, really interesting to see as well, and really interesting to hear your perspective on research. And it's interesting, there was an organisation in Northern Ireland that does annual research on attitudes to litter, for example, and one of the questions was, do you ever drop litter yourself? And when people were asked face to face, the number was quite low. Then, due to COVID, they moved the survey online this year, and the number of people dropping litter has significantly increased, potentially because they don't have to stare the interviewer in the eye. So that was an interesting one as well in terms of research. Also in terms of self-recording, the folk in the industry, and it'd be interesting maybe to hear in the comments, Strava have just launched a new service called Strava Metro, which is free of charge to planners and people like ourselves now. Now, it may be fairly urban in its approach, but just when you talked about self-recording, that may be a way to look at how people are self-recording their travels and their activities in an area. So that's one worth, as a sector, worth looking at. Say it may be quite urban at this stage, but hopefully that will grow into the countryside as we move forward. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next, thanks both again, we're going to move on to our next presentation now, which is from Jenny Wilson and Joanne Mason from Forestry England, both technical recreation advisors. Jenny and Joe have been really organised, and they have recorded theirs in advance, so once I stop talking, the guys are going to cue that up, and I say remember to ask your questions in the question panel as we move forward.
Hi everyone, I'm Joanne Mason, and behind me is my colleague Jenny Wilson. Morning. And we're technical recreation advisors for Forestry England. We'd like to talk to you today about the new visitor to our forests. But first, we need to cast our minds back to the 23rd of March, when the Prime Minister announced a national lockdown, an unprecedented step to attempt to limit the spread of coronavirus. People were only allowed to leave their homes for 4 basic reasons, which in short meant no non-essential travel. We shut our gates and closed our visitor information points and furloughed many of our frontline recreation staff for 3 to 4 weeks. In an equally unprecedented response, Forestry England also asked our visitors not to visit our forest unless they were on foot and taking one of their forms of exercise per day. Aware of the significant change this would be to many of our visitors, and knowing that for some, access to gardens or green space would be really challenging, we set about bringing the forest to them. We wanted to continually to actively engage with our visitors and provide them with tools and activities they could use from their own green spaces. We put together a number of activities that could be completed at home, in a garden, or any other green space that was available. We also provided virtual materials, allowing people to transport themselves into the forest. Examples of this included a recording of the forest for a session of forest bathing, podcasts, or virtual field trips. These allowed anyone to experience a bit of their forests at home. Over the weeks, we all became more aware of the importance of access to green spaces and the ability for us to connect with nature. That classic Joni Mitchell song lyric is especially timely. It came to mind as major parts of our lives which we took for granted suddenly appeared to be gone. The second was the importance of our website as a means of communication with our audience. It was necessary for timely, up-to-date information about our forests and facilities and became an important single point of truth. What things are open? What's shut? What can I do when I get there? What should I consider before I come? And because of the significant change across all aspects of our lives, pre-planning became more important than ever. Our digital team had to do a lot in a short space of time with a reduced staff resource to ensure that the information required for our visitors was available and kept up to date as the situation evolved and changed over the summer months. On the slide are some of the things that we updated during lockdown, ensuring that our web pages were up to date with information about what was open and what was closed, coronavirus guidance and frequently asked questions. We also updated the information about activities we had to pause and suspend across our site. Looking back, you can see here on the 11th of May when the UK government allowed us to take unlimited amounts of exercise and remove the restrictions on travel. You can see from the graph the increased traffic through our website as the restrictions were removed. This increased freedom to exercise and access green spaces led to a surge in visitor numbers across all of our sites. Like many others, we had to react quickly to reopen and re-engage with visitors in a safe manner. We introduced new systems and processes to make sure our sites were safe, and we are still adapting to life alongside coronavirus. We track visitor numbers at 5 of our key sites, and you can see from the graph that in June, all of our sites were tracking above the same period in 2019. Western Burt's figures don't quite meet, but that's because they reopened on the 3rd of June and had a new pre-booking system, but they achieved almost the same figures as last year. It was busy every day, but weekends were noticeably peak periods for us. At many locations, demand outstripped capacity, and we had to actively engage through social media to alert our visitors to check ahead and avoid busy times. Managing sites with adequate space for social distancing was key, and despite all sites did reach capacity on a regular basis and were forced to close entry points and car parks for periods better. You can see from the graph that the speed at which the public started to look for something to do was almost immediately after the government announcement on the 11th, unlocking more freedom of movement. This thirst for inspiration and information followed on the morning after, and by lunchtime on the 12th, traffic had started to drop off as people were either already at our sites or had a plan of where they were going to go. Compared to the year before, traffic was up 240% on the Monday and 750% on the Tuesday.
All of this searching for local green space meant that we started to see a different type of visitor arrive in the woods, beyond the familiar faces we're used to seeing out on site. But who are these visitors that we currently have? Well, families is one of the main segments, and those engaging in activities on our estate, everything from yoga, park run and horse riding. We also have an older audience who come to enjoy the peace and quiet that the forest has to offer, albeit outside of a bank holiday weekend. We started to see more younger visitors come out to our sites and less older visitors, possibly due to shielding or other health concerns. Research told us that overall 16% of visitors were new to Forestry England, which any marketing colleague will tell you is a significant rise in new audiences. We saw more of the 16 to 34-year-old category and also 45 to 54-year-olds, both alone, in groups or as couples, and they were much more interested in walking, cycling and photography than our existing visitors. We started to see a broader demographic of people visiting our woodlands, particularly around urban and peri-urban areas. But we also saw an increase in 16 to 34-year-olds with young children who were not your typical family audience in wellies and all-in-one suits, happy to splash around in muddy puddles, but they were more interested in a kind of nice day out with a picnic than our existing visitors. But the main question, as with all of this survey work, is will they return? We know that these visitors had a choice of green space to go to, and they didn't just pick Forestry England because it was the closest option to their home, which is really great news for us. More than that, 91% of the visitors had a good time and rated their experience with us in a very positive light. But as with everything, there's always two sides to every story. Whilst we've talked about some of the positives of new audiences and the new opportunities to engage with them, we also experienced some real challenges over the summer season, and our staff have definitely felt the effects of that. The holy grail for all of us who work in this space is to learn how we can start to influence and modify visitor behaviour out on site. We don't profess to know the answers to this, and as you'll know, it's not an exact science, even when things are going right. We have a few reflections and thoughts to share with you today, but we know we're just at the beginning of this process and have really only scratched the surface when it comes to influencing visitor behaviour out in the ground. What's next? We do know that the earlier you start in the visitor journey, the more likely you are to be able to start to sow the seeds to influence their behaviour when they're out on site. Telling people in advance that they can't have a barbecue does reduce the likelihood you'll have to break up a party of keen pyromaniacs with their $2.99 disposable barbecues. We know it's not always guaranteed to work with the most determined of customers, but it does help to flag these things before they leave the house. Likewise, telling people what they can expect in terms of COVID precautions and expectation setting around their visit in general is also helpful in the current circumstances. We also use the website as a really key tool here to help visitors understand, respect and protect the environment they're coming to visit, taking the opportunity to reiterate the forest, dog and cycling codes to reduce conflict between user groups out on site. What became clear throughout the period is that we started to see this new type of visitor who might usually spend their Saturday in a shopping centre or cinema suddenly venturing out into the woods. I joke, but we did start to see visitors with minimal levels of self-reliance visit our woodlands, and in some areas they were visiting more rural or remote locations as a result of geographic restrictions or overcrowding at some of our more popular sites. This poses a real challenge to us as landowners and land managers, as the traditional vertical correlation we'd normally expect with the risk control spectrum has been thrown up in the air. It'll be interesting to see if others have similar reflections in the breakout sessions afterwards. As a result, we realised we needed to approach the issue of building self-reliance and personal responsibility within our visitor audience in a really sensitive manner. So we started to break down the technical lingo and help people get prepared for a day out in the woods. We all know that a picture paints 1,000 words, and never before has it been more important to think carefully about the imagery that we choose to use. In choosing the right image, we help visitors make an informed choice and thereby reduce the possibility of them getting into trouble when they're out and about on site.
Great. Thanks very much to both Joe and Jenny there. I'm not sure whether it was my broadband or everybody else involved. There was a few little dropouts there as we went through that. Obviously, we'll get that remedied whenever we send round the video afterwards. So I think we maybe lost a wee bit at the end there, maybe just due to file size. So we'll make sure we get those sent round to you with the video and with the slides as we move forward. And we also know the next time that VSG get together for one of our pre-seminar dinners that Joe Mason will be leading the charge in the karaoke as well. So we'll look forward to that, Joe. So apologies, Jenny and Joe, for the wee glitch there, but say everybody will get a chance to see that when we move forward. So just conscious of time, we're going to move on to Noel Doyle, who's a researcher with Leave No Trace Ireland. Are you there, Noel?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Great, and we can hear you. We can hear you loud and clear. That's great. So your first slide is up there, Noel. So just in interest of time, I'm going to pass straight over to you and let you get started.
Okie dokie. So hello everyone. Good morning. My name is Noel Doyle. I'm a researcher for Leave No Trace Ireland. I've recently just completed my PhD, which involves the affecting behavioural change in outdoor recreationists. So many of you are probably already affiliated with Leave No Trace or have heard about them, but I just thought I'd quickly mention who we are. So Leave No Trace Ireland, we're a national movement. We originated in the United States, but we're now found in over 90 countries. We're a registered charity and we're compliant with the governance code. We've also been embedded in the Outdoor Northern Ireland Action Plan, as well as Cormac Tuath in Ireland. And we support the United States Sustainable Development Goals. And our mission is to promote responsible recreation throughout Ireland through education, research and partnerships. And can I get the next slide, please? So when you're trying to understand the new visitor, it's always a bit of a good idea to talk about what was around before. And so we looked at the research that has been done by various organizations, and there was a growth. There was the beginning of a growth in participation in outdoor recreation in recent years. As well as that, the most popular recreational activity continues to be personal exercise, followed by swimming, running and cycling. And again, this has been said before, but when the lockdown came into effect due to COVID-19, there was a surge of people who needed to get outdoors and who were unable to. And the reason they went to the outdoors was for their mental and physical well-being. And with the easing of restrictions, people traveled to more popular sites or more picturesque areas in order to recreate and get in touch with nature. In addition, with the easing of restrictions, the government of Ireland, there was an increase in staycations throughout Ireland as people were afraid to go to other countries, or there was nervousness about that. So we had an increase in staycations and people visiting areas in Ireland. Can I get the next slide, please? So when we're trying to understand a new visitor, Leave No Trace has focused on looking at as many sources of data as possible. So we began by looking at what the United States have been doing, Leave No Trace in the US, and they were very proactive during the whole period. They published guidelines on and research for land management in response to COVID-19. They had similar results to what's been found in the UK and in Northern Ireland and in Ireland, in that there was not only a change in the amount of people engaging in outdoor recreation, but a change in how they engaged with outdoor recreation. And this mainly came from people in urban-based areas, as well as people who are heavily involved in more high-octane behaviours like rock climbing. They were no longer able to do this, so they needed to find a new avenue. So Leave No Trace US also delivered an interagency campaign with the hashtag Recreate Responsibly. And can I get the next slide, please? So using the US as like a foundation, we decided to look at what research had been done in Ireland from Sport Ireland as well as the RNLI. And what we have found is that across all groups, all genders, there was an increase in recreational behaviour, particularly among those those aged under 45. And what we found about these people is that they were unsure of their correct behavior in the outdoors, that they were adapting their activity to account for a lack of sporting facilities, and that there was a significant lack in skills and knowledge. Next slide, please. And very similar research found in the RNLI that it was a need to engage with nature, that people were engaging with nature for their physical and mental well-being. And what we found was the new visitors, and this has already been touched on before, which I'm actually very interested in seeing, that it's actually coming from multiple avenues, that the new visitor tended to be younger, and this led to a significant impact, particularly with younger groups trying to break quarantine or get into social gatherings. This led to significant problems, particularly with PPE littering, wild camping. I'm going to say irresponsible wild camping because there is two different types, as well as damage caused to honeypot sites. There was also an increased threat from wildflowers. This is information we gathered from talking to our core stakeholders about the most prominent type of new visitor that they've had to deal the impacts with. In addition, we've also had an increase in families picnicking, which has also been talked about in previous presentations. In addition, there's now been issues with crowding, parking, and over-tourism as people are flocking to these picturesque honeypot sites to recreate. Next slide, please. So the next, why does Leave No Trace want to change this behavior? Because despite people, and this has been found in research regarding outdoor recreation and recreational behavior, people have a pro-environmental attitude and they care for the environment, but they are oftentimes unaware of the impacts that they are actually causing. And this is where we believe that Leave No Trace's skills and techniques can help people and increase their awareness and their skills and their confidence to make the right decisions in the outdoors. And that the cumulative effect of what we do can have a significant impact in reducing the negative damages to the environment. Next slide, please. So, but what we have found, and I'm sure people have been aware of this as well before, is that despite having great environmental messages and focused on the delivery of education, that is truly communication, working with organizations, the building of successful networks and partnerships, as well as talking to communities and developing ground-up approaches to promoting responsible recreation. That's where the real influence and where we can have the most impact. Next slide, please. So Leave No Trace, we haven't been idle, which is great, and many organizations were very busy over the period with this unprecedented growth in outdoor recreation. And so the first thing we did was we produced COVID-19 guidelines for all users for responsible use of outdoor recreation during the pandemic. We also developed new guidelines for our trainers in order to deliver our educational and training programs safely. We were in constant engagement with our stakeholders and we designed webinars for them. We created online youth videos that can be found on YouTube to help teach people in a communicative way of how to recreate responsibly. We published and uploaded new website sections with guidelines on responsible recreation. And finally, we began and we delivered a national awareness campaign in partnership with the Government of Ireland. Next slide, please. And this national campaign focused on litter, because on top of the data that we have gathered and from communication with all of our stakeholders, it was found that litter was a very visible impact that they were seeing, and that it was having a significant impact on the environment. So this was a new Government of Ireland campaign which was launched to tackle a growing issue with litter throughout the country, particularly in our scenic areas. It was an interagency initiative with the National Parks and Wildlife Service, Waterways Ireland, Inland Fisheries, Fáilte Ireland, Sport Ireland, the Department of Community and Rural Development and the Office of Public Works, Cuilcha, and it was coordinated by Leave No Trace. If we can just go to the next slide, we can talk about the outputs of the initiative. And there was a significant number of outputs. First, there was an interagency press release. We had media events, social media campaigns, videos were produced. We had radio segments, as well as being featured on news articles, newspapers, and with increased website traffic and stakeholder and public engagement. We are in the process of compiling all the outputs into a research report, but if you can just go to the next slide, but the impacts and output and outreach that Leave No Trace has received since the campaign was delivered has been phenomenal. So moving on now to the key learnings and takeaway of the COVID-19 and dealing with the new visitor is that there is a surge of new visitors to the outdoors and that they need guidance, and that we see this as an enormous opportunity for reaching a new audience and a new people with an environmental message, because they are getting to the outdoors because they care about the environment and they need to go to the environment, and they just need to be aware of how we can recreate responsibly. We have found that partnering with state agencies has been extremely effective. We feel that we have a great environmental message, but using their skills, their communicative networks, and working together, we have been able to reach a broader audience and increase our scope and impact, and that a large collaborative effort from multiple organizations can have a high impact on influencing behavioral change. Thank you very much.
Noel, thank you very much. Excellent stuff there. I mean, it's been really impressive to watch. You're certainly right in what you've said, that Leave No Trace Ireland have not sat idle during this very difficult period, and it's been very impressive to watch the collaborative approach that's taken place in the Republic of Ireland to bring those messages together and as you say, communicate them through the various channels. Obviously, many of the VSG Irish members have been heavily involved in that through the VSG Ireland subgroup as well. So it's been great that medium and that forum, headed up by Tom O'Keefe, has been a real asset to that campaign and that initiative as well. So well done, Noel. Well done, Leave No Trace Ireland, and thanks very much for sharing with us today. So next up, we're going to go to Nick Ayers, who's with the RNLI. So Nick again has pre-recorded his, so that should be ready to go. And say, just in interest of time, I'm just going to cue that straight up.
Hello everybody, my name is Nick. I'm from the RNLI. I am the water safety lead for the North and East of England. Sorry I can't be there today. We've got a big team meeting happening that happens twice a year, so I can't get to be alive on live feed or anything like that. So I've done a recording, which I would like to say I did it in one take, but I certainly haven't. It's been a bit of a test and trial for me. Anyway, I head up water safety and drowning prevention here in the North and East of England, and I cover from Berwick-upon-Tweed down to Burnham-on-Crouch. I've got 3 other team members in the North and East who look after the volunteers who dedicate their time to deliver water safety messaging. And then we also have a couple other guys looking at strengthening our partnerships with external agencies and also internal partners as well in the RNLI. So the brief was to provide a bit of knowledge or feedback on our new visitor to the coast. And I would like to say that we know that straight away, but we are sort of coming up with the latest sort of stats and figures from the summer. So what I can do and I can offer is the summer that we've just had, and believe me, it has been like a summer like no other. The impact that COVID-19 has had on our seasonal lifeguards and also our lifeboat services as well, and then on the institution in general. I'll go over the water safety messages and the sort of the way that we delivered it this year and still continuing to deliver. and then I will share with you some new sort of ways of volunteering with the RNLI that we've sort of come up with. So like most organisations out there and companies, businesses, we've all seen a huge change in the way that we sort of work, you know, working from home for the last sort of 6 to 8 months, to shelving all of our planned activity, pausing some of our rollouts of stations of lifeguarded beaches, loads of different things going on. And we've really had to change the way that we deliver our messaging to the public. This is the first year that we've ever been launching a campaign in conjunction with the HM Coast Guard. So, you know, a huge stakeholder, key stakeholder with the RNLI, delivering a specific message to the general public on staying safe, protecting the family, following the safety advice, and helping to save lives. So it was the first one this year, first one ever, sorry, that we've launched with the Coast Guard. And at the same time, we used our partner GAA in Ireland to help share and spread our life-saving messages. Before the sort of lockdown came, we knew a few things were potentially happening. You know, one of those was the ban on international travel. So we knew that activity around the coast this summer would be huge, something that we probably haven't seen for a number of years. We also knew that schools were potentially closing, and we knew that a lot of people like myself and a lot of other people in the RNLI would be working from home for the near future. We also knew that the daily exercise, taking that one form of activity out and about, that could potentially lead to people, you know, exercising and taking their daily exercise out at the coast or on the water as well. So we had to quickly come up with a new way, a new strategy of delivering a safety message that is right, it's moldable. So when we do have these local lockdown procedures or those restrictions, we can change it as and when. We also needed something that was familiar to the eye, hence the reason why we went for that sort of chevron approach: protect your family, follow the safety advice, and save lives. We knew that those activities, potentially like stand-up paddleboarding, open water swimming, kayaking, they were going to go through the roof. We kind of knew that because they are very socially distanced activity where people can, you know, really gain that space that we always sort of talk about. So all of these things are really good activities for that, but without having that prior knowledge or that understanding of the risks is a real nasty sort of recipe for disaster, for that new thrill seeker or that new space seeker, if you like. Pretty soon after that, we had to make some real tough decisions in the RNLI. And when we were talking about PPE and the way that we have to protect our own, we had to come up with a sort of a statement fairly early on in the COVID crisis that we wouldn't run our seasonal beach lifeguards. When I say we wouldn't be training up our lifeguards that we normally do in March and April. We wouldn't be able to provide a safe place to train them. All of our lifeguards have to go through vigorous fitness tests and standards prior to them actually going on the beach and providing that surveillance. So we came out with that we wouldn't be patrolling at any of the beaches here in the UK and Ireland this summer. Now, obviously that brought on quite a lot of pressure to our communities, our landowners, our stakeholders. So then we had to come back to them and provide them with a sort of a step-by-step process where they can help mitigate or sort of cancel out some of those risks at the coast. Now, we took on the furlough scheme at the RNLI and put some people onto furlough as there was a huge uncertainty of what the future would look like. We then were able to assess the problem with PPE and gain stock ourselves, really making sure that all that PPE would come into and would go out to the lifeboat service. Now, at the RNLI, we then made that decision that we would go out to a certain number of beaches in the summer. And we did that by a risk by risk, beach by beach sort of status, by looking at historical information such as rescues, stats, and then coming up with the best way to cover as many beaches as possible. Now, as we saw the sort of reduction in our education programs, where people would go out to schools and user groups, that wasn't the case. We were stopping all of our educational activity, from Meet the Lifeguard, from our lifeguard services to our volunteers going into the public, into the communities. So we had to think fast and come up with new ways that we could educate the general public, and potentially educating our sort of new visitors to the coast. We knew that people would be traveling from inland to coastal spots, to new locations in the UK, where people were exploring different areas of the countries. So we took to social media. We used social media to our advantage. Now, we can't claim this this activity that we did on Facebook Live. It probably came from Joe Wicks doing more of the PE classes. But we took Liam to the screens and performed our water safety Wednesdays. Every Wednesday, Liam would go through a different educational theme each week, providing a 30-minute water safety session where families at home could dial into, watch, learn, take part in, and go away with some form of exercise to do for the following week. Just in the first session, we saw 17,000 people dial in and tune into the first episode. And it then sparked conversation and prompted us to work with our other partners, such as the RYA, when lockdown restrictions were being released, to do your boat safety checks and checking your equipment before going out to sea, where some places would be more winterized. You'd need to then go and sort of check your boats. We then started to look at how we could reach a new audience and a new style of volunteer. We knew that volunteering in RNLI terms, that we would be out in the public, going to events, going to shows, promoting water safety messages, face-to-face engagement. All of those kind of activities were put on the shelf, and we needed to come up with a way that we could still relay our safety message. Now, with shops and cafes and bars and restaurants slowly opening, there was an opportunity there where we could ask them to share a message, a simple message like a poster in the window, or relaying a safety message, similar to what we do anyway in some of our activities, like the Waterside Responder Scheme, where we train them how to use a piece of life-saving equipment. We're then teaching them how to deliver a life-saving message. So we looked at different ways that we could do this, and the local ambassador scheme is being rolled out across the country, and here in the North and East we're up to about 27 different cafes and shops and restaurants who have signed themselves up to promote our messaging. A simple sign-up form online with a response of an email. We're attaching a poster to put up in their window. Now, we initially thought that would just be a summer program, a summer campaign, local ambassador. But then we've slowly started to think about how we can then move that into everyday life at the RNLI. And looking at the World Health Organization, they sort of recommend strengthening communities and providing that sort of army of volunteers who can promote a safety message. And that is just one of those examples. The other one at the top left, that deck chair. So by working with welcome break service stations on the road, we pinpointed key locations where people would be traveling, primarily in the southwest, where people were traveling from the likes of London, Bristol, Bath. They were all heading down that sort of M4 area. So targeting those welcome centres and welcome with key specific beach information, that pre-arrival education messaging. Again, reaching that new audience who'd be turning up to the beach who potentially wouldn't have gone to that location this summer. The other one is where we saw a huge uptake in inflatable users, from your standard unicorns to your stand-up paddleboards to inflatable kayaks. Now, again, going back to seeking that sort of extra distanced, socially distanced activity, these are all great, but inflatable rings and inflatable unicorns are definitely not designed for the sea. And this is the first year where we've taken that approach to say, don't take inflatables into the water. Now, if you're taking a stand-up paddleboard or an inflatable kayak, knowing the dangers before you go, such as weather, such as offshore winds. So just being a bit more aware about that. So we've had to really adapt the way that we sort of promote that message. And we've really used the form of media to our advantage by putting ourselves out there in the media and sharing news stories and sharing our local messages according to the weather up and coming. And then lastly, another rescue story. This is a really nice one, actually, from young Alfie. Alfie was paddleboarding off the coast of Wales when he got into difficulty. The weather turned, but Alfie had listened to the safety advice of wearing a buoyancy aid, always taking a mobile phone in a waterproof pouch with you whilst going in or on the water. Now, he got into trouble. He lost his paddleboard. He dialed 999 whilst floating on his back and called for help. Now, we don't know where he got the information from to, wear a buoyancy aid or take his phone with him, but he made that call and he was able to float on his back and remain calm by talking to the Coast Guard on the other end of the phone. We then used the story with Alfie and partnered with British Canoeing and the Coast Guard to issue a free mobile phone pouch when they read the life-saving story. And as you can see down here, that is on the 15th of September. So there's a really quick turnaround from the actual rescue to then turning it around into a life-saving skill with also the chance to gain a free phone pouch. Again, all these steps wouldn't have probably happened going back last year. It's only because we've been able to work with our internal partners really quickly and straight to the point. So that kind of brings me to the end of the presentation. Like I said at the beginning, we are now starting to work out what we have seen a huge increase in. But what we do know is that it was the everyday sort of general public seeking more space and potentially new areas of the UK and Ireland that they had never been to before. People coming from inland locations to new locations such as Doyle, Cornwall, and trialing out different activities that they'd never done before. And that was the one thing that we were really using in our sort of media interviews. Now's not the time to try something new. Go and learn it when it's good to. And I think that's the new visitor that we saw this summer. Thanks for listening, and I hopefully will be able to join you later on Tuesday when we'll meet together, and look forward to chatting to you one-to-one then.
Great. Thanks very much, Nick, and we'll look forward to catching you in the breakout room in a few moments. So some, again, great stuff there, and some similar trends to Noel's presentation as well around that collaborative approach, but really interesting to see how RNLI moved that to another level with real good engagement with local communities as well. I think that's something we can all definitely learn from, but really good to see some innovative and practical measures taking place to keep that water safety message up there, and lovely. It's always nice when you work on campaigns, I think, to see end results. So that story about Alfie definitely rung true there. So great to see that. So again, breakout room shortly, but we've one last presentation before we move into the breakout rooms, and we have asked Anthony Rawlins, said CEO from Digital Visitor, to join us. As I said earlier, I've enjoyed reading Anthony and his team's blogs over the lockdown, over the COVID period. I think they offer a different approach and a different angle on things. So I'll not talk too much more. Anthony, I'm gonna pass on to you. You can hear me okay, and we can hear you, I'm sure.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Can you hear me? Yeah.
We can hear you, and we've got your slides up. So I'll not introduce you anymore. I'll let you introduce a bit more about yourself and let you continue on.
That's very kind. Okay. Hi, everyone. I will try and keep this moderately brief and keep it top line because I know we're running a bit over. So today, the presentation we're going to look at is going to explore the new audiences that we've all received of late and the new challenges that they bring. Now, as you know, so my name is Anthony. I'm the CEO of Digital Visitor. Digital Visitor are the UK's leading strategic marketing agency for travel and tourism industry, and these are an example of some of our clients just to establish where our expertise comes from. Now, we were originally asked to speak at this based on the COVID consumer segments that we actually produced some content around, actually. So I'll touch very briefly on these. Now, these COVID consumer segments were a piece of research created by BBA BDRC, which are a very good research organisation that we're very good friends with, and they were publishing this through various travel and tourism channels. And what we've got here is a new approach to how to look at the kind of current, immediate and present audiences that we're all experiencing. So just talking through this a little bit, the COVID concerned are very much the worst affected people by COVID. They've probably been directly affected by COVID and its implications. They're incredibly cautious and anxious. They are the least likely to return to normality soon. And really, in some instances, look maybe to only resume normal behaviour when there's a cure, a vaccine, or something like that. The next group, the COVID cautious, they are concerned, absolutely, about COVID, but in a more general sense, maybe not have been directly affected by the condition themselves. They are pessimistic in that pessimistic, maybe they're actually most realistic, where they feel that we're not necessarily past the worst yet, and they're probably quite accurate potentially. They're reluctant to engage in behaviours, even those that might seem to be safe and we'd be encouraged to do so. I think that they're certainly sitting on the fence a lot more. So this is a significant proportion of the visitors. Now, the next section, the pragmatic policy individuals, very much consider that the worst is over, and very positive about the government support and what they're doing, and they do support the initiatives such as Eat Out to Help Out, etc., and really are trying to carry on with things within the framework that the government says it's okay to do so. And finally, probably where I fit into this category is the life goes on, maybe some of you as well. Chances are at least 39% of the people on this call will fit into that if this is an accurate survey. And life goes on is very much people would just like this over. They think that yes, it is a condition, but are researching wider about medical information that's out there about its true effectiveness and fatality rates. They feel that the economy is very important and potentially the repercussions longer lasting on that are going to be more impactful. And they're generally quite relaxed about the situation, not with the rules by any means, but certainly the situation, and really would hope for things to continue. So this is great, but this information and research, an article that we wrote, was done on the 2nd of September, which might as well have been 5 years ago almost, considering the change that we've had now with everything that's going on. So I won't really focus too much more on this because it's probably completely irrelevant now. It's not irrelevant. It's very useful to see the shifting patterns of people's behaviours. But what I do feel is that we can look at this as an indicator, but actually, really, things have moved on already. So I guess rather than talk about what people are doing right now and trying to predict what we're doing right now, when actually things are changing on a daily and weekly basis, I thought maybe it would be better for this conversation to talk about the things that have changed. And actually, Chris, as you mentioned at the beginning, the challenges we've got as the outdoor sector, but also the opportunity that brings and how we can capitalise on this, and capitalise in terms of for the betterment of the environment and for nature and people's connection with nature. So it's obviously been a challenging year, and I'd like to address probably 3 challenges in this conversation. First of all, is we've seen lots of new visitors. Many were great and some we'd rather not see again. Absolutely fair. But the opportunity therefore here is, how do we capture the right new audiences? So opportunity number 1, how do we capture the right new audiences? Secondly, how can we resource this increased visitation to our natural destinations? As you all know, this is clearly a shot from Dartmoor, which is where I live, so it was very beautiful to see some of those photos. This isn't Dartmoor, by the way, obviously. But how can we resource increased visitation to our natural destinations? But the opportunity there as well, I feel, is how can we actually encourage more advocacy? How can we encourage more advocacy and people experiencing these destinations and our natural environments in the right way? And third and finally, the biggest challenge, which unfortunately I'm not really going to touch on too much, how do we do a bigger job with more limited resources? This is a bigger job for all of us on this conversation. So really the answer that I would look at, or the opportunity, is how can we grow revenue to fund and support the increasing resources that we're going to need? An incredibly difficult time, considering obviously the Chancellor's talked about various different measures even just yesterday, but there we go. So this presentation, what I'd like to do very briefly is just to talk through how to attract the right new audiences and how to create long-term advocates. So stage 1 of how we do both of those things, the right audiences and new advocates. Well, stage 1, how do we reach the right new visitors? Well, really, it's no surprise that digital consumption has gone through the roof over during lockdown and since March. It was always growing anyway, but really we've seen potentially 2 or 3 years worth of growth in about 2 or 3 weeks at the beginning of lockdown, and then it's continued upwards. So really, people are using digital channels a heck of a lot more. And the question is, though, with so much choice out there, with so many things that you could do, what are the very best channels for you to operate on? And actually, what many organisations that we're speaking with are doing, like actually many of you have done actually during this time, is they've really focused on their owned channels. The channels that provide that information. So Forestry England showed excellent examples of the content that they were providing on their website. And when I'm talking about owned channels, I'm talking about their own website, their own blogs and their own social channels, and actually implementing activities that drive people towards those owned channels. Because at a time of craziness that we're having, at a time of such change, actually the best use of marketing resource and budget is investment in those channels that you have yourselves. And many of you, I've been following the content of many of you. I'm going to actually bring up specifically Southwest Lakes Trust, who I've had some conversations with, and just looking at some of the content that they produce on an ongoing basis. Neil Reeves, specifically, to embarrass you a little bit because I think you're on this call. I've just been looking at the LinkedIn content that they've been producing and just putting out there, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's authentic, it's engaging, but this is an owned channel response. And these are some of the things that you should really be looking at. Oh, wait, can I go back a sec? Now, when it comes to how to activate those owned channels, the channels yourself, we should be looking at activities such as search engine optimization, content on your social media channels and blog, and also capturing email addresses. These are the main things that the biggest travel and tourism companies and the smallest travel and tourism companies are doing in order to invest in marketing going forwards. And I recommend the outdoor sector does exactly the same approach. Many of you are doing this already. Another thing, somebody touched on partnerships just before as well, actually. Another thing is to find organizations that share an audience and share a purpose and values, and team up in terms of content creation and sharing and broadcast, so you can capitalize or utilize their audiences and engage with their audiences and vice versa. And that's what quite a few organizations are doing, and what challenging times brings to the fore is a greater propensity to collaborate and work together, which obviously this group is doing as an example right now. Now, another way then of attracting the right audiences is about re-engaging them. Now, really what I'm suggesting is that you utilize your own channels and drive visitors to these channels organically, naturally, because they are searching online and via Google, and they are looking on social channels and trying to find content. But what we then need to do is re-engage them as well. So don't just let them find our content. We should then try and get them back to our channels again. So once they've visited us online once, let's try and do this again. And there are a number of ways of doing this. Again, you can do this with search engine optimizations, but something that has been very, very effective, and I would say maybe outperforms all other media advertising at the moment for us anyway, certainly in the sector, is social retargeting. So this is identifying all the people who visited your website and kind of advertising to that group of people. It's very cost effective, but actually you're really kind of pushing against an open door to a certain degree in terms of your communications with those individuals. So social advertising and social retargeting is very, very important too. So this is how I suggest, first of all, you attract and communicate with the right audiences. So the next stage of what I would recommend that we do as well is that we then need to establish that kind of digital or that connection with your visitors. Once we've actually attracted them to our sites and to our own channels, we then want to kind of build that relationship with them. Excuse me. And there are a number of ways of doing this. So naturally, we would want to keep email communications with them. It's one of the most important ways of actually communicating people, one of the most effective and most cost effective as well. So really, we want to capture their email addresses, and there are ways of doing this on your websites. You could have an email gate there, for example. Also encourage them to connect to your social channels as well. Again, many of you are doing this very well, but you don't just need to look at Facebook, you can look at LinkedIn as well, knowing that many of the people that are visiting are furloughed or have been furloughed office workers as such, so they'll be using LinkedIn potentially as well as their primary social channel. One interesting way that I would really like to see the outdoor sector adopt a little bit is what some pubs and restaurants have been doing, certainly in the city in Bristol where I am at the moment, which is just QR code scanning. And it's been really effective, but there's not really anything stopping you having QR codes on site, asking people to scan, and when they do that, for them to give you their email address. You've created that digital connection with them, which gives you the ability to communicate with them continually. Now, once we have that, once we've got these audiences to our site and to our owned channels, and we've established this connection with them, what we then need to do is how do we turn them into advocates? Well, really, there's kind of one general way of doing this, and it is we need to take them on a journey. We need to present a narrative to them, which again many of you are doing, and what we need to do is we need to produce really useful content again, but to take them on the journey of, first of all, connecting them with our natural environments. Secondly, this will encourage an affinity for those environments and for these places that you look after. And finally, that affinity will hopefully breed a desire to protect that environment. So connection, affinity, protection. This is the journey we want to take them on with our content. And the way we do that is the content needs to be engaging, colourful, interesting. It needs to be accessible, and by accessible I mean it needs to demonstrate easy things for people to do with obviously a nice caring message at the end of it. Purposeful as well. And another point I've said here is sequential. You can actually broadcast your content, so a visitor to your site could see content item number 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4 and carry on that storytelling. You can do this with a host of different tactics, and it's a very clever way of building up the story of your organization and how you would like people to engage with nature. And the other thing to mention as well is it can be commercial. You can ask, in some cases, if you stick to the 80-20 rule, as in only 20% of the most being commercial, it can be commercial. You can ask for donations, or you can ask for feedback, and you can ask people for things, because again, the more you take them down that journey and that path, then the more they're going to be willing to try and contribute and help as well. So that's really the main areas of kind of reaching new audiences and how to create advocacy. Now I've got a final point here that I will touch on a little bit more. I'll just be 2 minutes actually, Chris, if that's okay. And this is addressing the third challenge. The third challenge we had is, how do we do more to a bigger job that we've all been asked to do with limited resources or with fewer resources? And the answer is, well, we need to generate more revenue somehow. Now, I've been speaking with CEOs and leaders of many trusts, many outdoor organisations and organisations in the outdoor sector, and it's quite scary actually. You know, one wildlife trust CEO told me that they're expecting a 25% reduction in donations over the coming few years due to austerity. Another, actually probably one of the biggest natural conservation charities in the country that I was speaking to, has been talking about that they would like to diversify and create some new products and innovate in order to capture a higher value customer. That gives them more revenue in that way. So they might typically get £5 or £10 per visitor, but is there a way of finding people that want to visit our natural environments at £100 or £150 for a group or something like that? The point I'm trying to make here is that the answer to how to generate and grow revenue streams is to diversify and innovate. And in line with that, there's a project that I'd like to literally take 60 seconds to explain to you about, which we might be able to pick up again in this group in future. I've been working with Sir Tim Smith of Eden Project for about a year now on a project called Nature Break. This will be a social enterprise, and profits generated from it significant profits generated from it will be going to conservation and trusts and protection of natural environments and wildlife. And what Nature Break is seeking to do is work with outdoor organisations, outdoor sector organisations, to collectivise the UK's greatest natural experiences. These are going to be at a price point of, say, 70 to 150, 200 pounds for a kind of private group. But what we're looking to do with all of the trusts that we're working with and all the charities and all the outdoor organisations is bring together these fantastic experiences so that people can do them, because we clearly all demonstrated there's a huge appetite for nature, but so many of us just don't know how to access nature. It's kind of the challenge we've always been trying to bridge, really. Now, some of you may have already done this. Some of you may have tried creating these higher value experiences, but never really got them off the ground. And some of you might not see how you could actually do them, but I'm pretty confident that every organisation on this call could in fact create and innovate a kind of higher value experience. And it would be very, very worthwhile. So that's the final thing to mention. Nature Break is working with outdoor sector organisations to craft and create and then broadcast these experiences out to the world for the protection of our natural environments in future. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to let you know about that.
Great, Anthony. Thank you very much indeed. That was a fantastic presentation, and definitely brought a whole different insight, I think, into our sector. So, you know, great to see that sort of sequential approach that you outlined there as to how people can think about how we act and how we communicate and what type of content that we pull together. So definitely great food for thought, and more opportunity to explore that obviously in the breakout room shortly. And I think we'll almost certainly take you up on your offer to come back and join us again at a future event. So thank you very much for your time, and indeed thank you very much to all the presenters for their time. I always appreciate when you're asked to speak at a webinar or an event. It's not the 10 minutes that you do on screen or on stage. It's those minutes you spend preparing and crafting presentations beforehand, and recording videos and making sure that the technical side of things work. I think we only had one glitch there, I think, with the Forestry England presentation, but to say we're maybe going to cover some of that in the breakout room now shortly. And again, as I said, that will be covered on the video when we send it out tomorrow. So the breakout rooms are up there. You'll have got links. You'll have registered for the breakout rooms, and you'll have got links to those breakout rooms both in your e-zine that you received prior to the webinar, and then Jane has also put them up in the message panel as well. So breakout room 1 with Anthony, and that's chaired by Ken Dodd, the VSG chair. Breakout room 2 is with the Orlando and Andrew from Dartmoor, and Jenny and Joe from Forestry England, and that's chaired by Adele from WWT. And I'll be chairing a session with Noel from Leave No Trace, and Nick from RNLI. So again, thank you to everybody. We're going to close this now. I'm conscious we've run quite considerably over time this time, but there's been so much good content to share, and it's been great to see. Actually, I think we've only maybe literally a handful of people have dropped off from the start of the webinar to the end. So that shows that people have been really engaged with the content as we've moved through. That's been fantastic. So listen, thanks very much. We'll see you all soon, hopefully in person. We'll see you all soon as well. I'm going to close now and give you a few moments to join in to your breakout rooms. Thank you all.